614 Productions would like to welcome you to the Not So Neutral Zone, a podcast for armchair enthusiasts by armchair enthusiasts. The opinions expressed on this show are those of the participants and in no way represent those of any sports league, organization, or athletes therein. Alright, today, your hosts, Jacob Mad Max Smith, David Mad Hatter Trexler, and we have a guest host with us today, Brooklyn Mad Dog Hopkins.
That works. I would say like maybe Mad Cat or something, but Mad Dog works.
Mad Dog. Gotta put you back on your leash.
I would have went with Jacob Super Bowl Smith, David Arena Bowl Trexler, and Brooklyn Toilet Bowl Hawkins.
That'll have to be the fantasy football edition. Yeah. The theme today is madness for March Madness.
Put a little asterisk beside that because it's not March Madness anymore. It's April Madness.
Well, I think there's one game in April? Every
this
other
year.
game's in
this year.
March. Yeah, that's true. Since they expanded it keeps getting pushed back.
And it's only the 18th, so it's not technically April yet.
We decided this year that we'd both do a joint bracket. Didn't go as planned, but aren't we? The podcast's bracket is number one. Then I believe it's you, then me.
That's correct. And Brooklyn bringing up third, actually tied with third with you. And Jordan, our other buddy, is in fifth. With Brooklyn and Jordan's brackets getting busted up by Virginia being defeated.
Yeah, Jordan has 2 Final Four teams left.
That's tough.
He has Carolina and Villanova. He only has one of his championship teams left with Villanova. D'Angelo had Murray State and Charleston, a 12 and 13 seed playing. And on the other side, Virginia and Carolina, so there's only one team left. Carolina loses, this bracket's dead. It's on life support right now.
It was a pretty dumb bracket from the beginning. So yeah, my Final Four is still intact. And then I think the joint bracket is still intact as well for the Final Four. No, the joint bracket, UVA. And my Final Four is still intact. I had UVA losing to Cincinnati in the Elite Eight.
I've got Villanova beating Gonzaga in the championship, Villanova beating Kansas, and Cincinnati losing to Gonzaga. So mine's still intact.
Still there.
If as long as none of my teams lose before the Elite Eight, be the longest my Final Four stayed intact.
All right, Brooklyn. You want to defend your bracket here?
Yeah, no, I'm not going to defend it. And I was just, looking, and I realized that my final two are completely shredded. I had UVA and Michigan State playing in the championship. And, none of them are going.
Yep, but you still got Villanova and Gonzaga for the Final Four. They're both still alive.
Which may happen. Probably not.
I remember when Gonzaga was considered an upset win if they won a game. Now, they're there all the time, and they're in Washington State, right?
Yeah, I believe that's correct. It's been quite an interesting NCAA tournament. We've had some rather big upsets. Obviously, the biggest upset is a 16 seed finally defeating a 1 seed. And not just beating them, but dominating them. Did you watch any of that game?
No, I haven't watched any. I do the bracket and let it go.
I didn't catch much of the actual game itself. I kept hearing about it. And then I had work the next day, so I actually went to bed a little early. But looking back at the highlights, UMBC just kept hitting the threes, and Virginia couldn't keep up in shots. They couldn't hit the threes. They couldn't hit the regular shots, and they got manhandled by a 16 seed.
I come very close to picking a number 1 seed to get beat, just to kind of play that whole devil's advocate kind of role. But I couldn't pick against Xavier or Villanova. Pennsylvania was the top ranked, or the top voted one out of all 4 16s that was voted to be the upset.
And it wasn't even a close game. Like, they got beat by 20 points. Like, you could have been better. They could have, lost by, maybe a point, but no, they got their asses crushed.
With Virginia, I guess it was just, we're the best team in the ACC this year, so we're going to write off the 16. I don't know that Roy Williams or Mike Krzyzewski have ever took Duke or Carolina into a number 1 seed and brushed off that 16. They treated them like it was the national championship game.
And I think that speaks a lot about coaching, because obviously Virginia is the much more talented team out of the two. Like, I have never heard of UMBC before this. For those of you that don't know what it is, it's University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And I really don't know much more of it past that, except their mascots, Chesapeake Bay Terrier. Yeah. No, Retriever. Not Terrier, Retriever.
And it's golden, not brown. I was watching something on TV about that earlier today.
No, it's not a golden retriever. It's a Chesapeake Bay Retriever.
Oh, maybe that's what it was.
Yeah, people were calling it golden retriever, but it is not.
You just called it a golden retriever. Or you said it was a retriever.
Said it was a retriever, not a terrier.
Did you see on Facebook there was a poll? I believe ESPN had it up. Who's your favorite Tiger between Clemson and Auburn's mascots? I had to go with Clemson. The Auburn mascot head looks just a little creepy.
Auburn's cute.
No.
No? Okay.
I must admit, I like Georgia with their actual bulldog they bring around.
I love that bulldog. That is such a cute bulldog.
It's a spoiled bulldog. Alright, well, what else in our brackets has been a surprise? Let's see, we got Loyola Chicago busting up brackets here. They defeated the 6 seed Miami 64-62, and then won another close game, beating the number 3 seed in the South in Tennessee. They'll play the winner of the Nevada-Cincinnati game, but they have a chance here to, if, let's say Nevada wins, their chance to beat them shoots up greatly. I think Cincinnati is a much more well-rounded team. I'm not going to pick Loyola Chicago to make the Elite Eight.
Definitely not possible, because George Mason, I believe, did it, and they made the Final Four as an 11th seed.
Yeah.
So it's definitely possible, and odds are you're going to see, I don't think any of our brackets are going to, the Final Four teams might make the Elite Eight, but 1 or 2 of them may get knocked out. Not as big of an upset as, say, the Jaguars making the AFC Championship game, but it's probably going to be maybe like a 5 or 6 seed that knocks them out. Will Loyola make the Final Four? No. Can they? Of course. No doubt.
does UMBC make the Final Four?
I'm not going to write them off because
I think the odds are very, very slim, but they've got the 9 seed. That's who they play next in Kansas State. And then if they get past Kansas State, they've got the number 5 in Kentucky. You could have, potentially, this is very low probability of happening, you could have a number 11 playing a number 16 in the Elite 8 for a spot in the Final Four.
You definitely don't want to say never, because in my experience watching sports, when they say, oh, well, this has never happened, like a 16 seed has never beat a number 1 seed in the men's tournament. UMBC's like, hold my beer. I gotcha. And
I think maybe that was part of what made them good. There was no pressure on them. If you go in there and you get you get manhandled and you lose badly, well, you're a 16 seed. You weren't supposed to do anything anyway. You're supposed to be there, play your game and go home. It's basically a first round bye for the number 1 seeds.
Basically, for them, it was like, I'm going to equate UMBC beating Virginia to Appalachian State beating Michigan in football a couple years ago in the season opener. They weren't supposed to do it. It was, here, we'll pay you a bunch of money. You come up here to our house. We smack you around, send you home with extra money for the school's program. Not come here and knock us off by 20 points.
I think it would definitely be like the perfect Cinderella story to have this team that nobody's ever heard of from probably this place that nobody's ever heard of go on to the Final Four and maybe possibly to the championship, but I don't think it's going to happen.
I think they played their championship game. They beat Virginia. That's their championship game. There will be a banner hung up at their court that they won their first NCAA tournament game against the top seeded team in the bracket, and they'll ride this for as long as they can. It'll be like UCF putting up their championship banner. They'll claim that. We beat the best.
They definitely earned their spot in history as the first 16 seed to beat a number 1. So they got that spot. If they win against Kentucky, which historically is a strong program, if they beat them, make it to the Final Four, make it to the Elite 8, Sweet 16, championship game. Could you imagine what would happen if this school won the championship? Some guy, I think, he bet $80 or $800.
It was $800,
and wound winning $16,000.
I can't believe that doesn't happen more often. And I'm also surprised with how little he won off that. I mean, $800 to $16,000 is a huge return on investment, but I'm surprised that it wasn't more than that. I guess odds makers are playing a little conservative.
Especially after the Super Bowl.
The Super Bowl, then there was
the World Series with the Cubs.
Yeah, and you had Premier League, Leicester City. I probably said that wrong. That won the Premier League. They were like 5,400 to 1 odds to win it.
That's a tough subject for me because Manchester United, I think, plays in that league too. So, it's... don't want to go there.
You don't want to go there? All right. Okay, as far as what we got next weekend, there's some interesting matchups. Over in the Midwest, we're looking at Syracuse knocked off Michigan earlier today to earn a trip to go play Duke. I picked Michigan State to win that game and Michigan State to also beat Duke. I think that was in our joint bracket as well. But then you got Kansas, who will play the winner of the Clemson-Auburn game later tonight. Texas Tech and Purdue in the East. The winner of that will play the winner of the Villanova versus either West Virginia or Marshall. You've got, in the West, you got Michigan will play the winner of the Texas A&M UNC game. And that winner of that game plays either Gonzaga or Xavier / Florida State. And then the South bracket, the one we spent so much time talking about, you've got Loyola Chicago playing the winner of the Nevada-Cincy game, and you've got Kentucky playing the winner of the UMBC-Kansas State game. So at a minimum, you're going to have, let's see, out of the South bracket, you'll have a 2 seed, possibly as high as the 2 seed, and as low as the 16. You can have the 9 seed, the 5 seed, or the 11 seed make the Final Four out of that bracket.
I still fail to understand why, whatever you want to call the committee that decides football in college, why they don't look at the basketball bracket and see things like that. That's what gets people excited. UMBC beats the number 1. I don't get why they let the SEC control everything, because they basically, for ever since Nick Saban's been at Alabama, pretty much have guaranteed the SEC one of the 2 spots in the national championship game, with the exception of the year that Oregon and Ohio State played in it. And to me, in March Madness, I actually look forward to stuff like a 16 beating a 1 and 11 beating a 6. I like that because it shows when you get into the playoffs, everybody's equal. It's kind of like in NFL. Jacksonville Jaguars, Tennessee Titans were not expected to... They were one and done. And it's just that parity is what people want in college football. We want to see Boise State play not Oregon, but somebody like Michigan State, Eastern Michigan versus Southern Illinois. We want that unexpected, not, okay, here's the playoffs, there's 4 teams, Alabama's in it, they're going to play for another national championship.
Yeah. Well, what would your solution be for NCAA football? Would it be to expand the playoff? Would you say expand the playoff? Or would you say you have to win your conference to get into the playoff? I think that argument's pretty much dead with Alabama winning the championship despite not winning their conference.
Twice they've done that. Before they lost to LSU, LSU won the conference or their division, beat Georgia in the SEC championship game in Georgia. Then Alabama wins the national championship. Mark in the book. Didn't compete for the conference. I'm not sure how many conferences there are in college. In football, I think there's less than basketball.
There's, depending on who you ask, there's 5 or 6 power conferences.
Okay, so make it an argument that the top... Go ahead and let those 6 power conferences have a spot in the playoffs. Not guaranteed a seed, just a spot. They be the top 6. Make it a 16-team bracket. Give each team, or even if you did like the NFL and did 12 wild card at large teams, they can be a conference champion from a lower division, or it can be somebody who has one of the top 12 or top 20 records that's not in there. But don't go by strength of schedule, because there's teams in the NFL, weak schedule, can win the Super Bowl. I mean, the argument is there because look what happened with the Giants. They beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl. They were a wild card. Patriots were the conference best record. It's not always about who's got the best, or if your program's got 90 guys on the squad, and that other school's only got 52 guys, barely enough to make an NFL roster, and you've got 2 times the players in, like an example of the Appalachian State, Michigan. How bad do you want it?
I think the biggest argument against expanding is adding more games to the schedule. You've already got players sitting out bowl games to declare for the NFL draft. You got to remember these guys are unpaid. They are on a scholarship. They get hurt. They might not get paid at the next level. They might not even play at the next level. They, might lose their scholarship if they get hurt and can't continue, which I think is terrible and an argument for another day. But I think my solution would be you add only one more game. You make it an 8-team. Or if you really wanted to preserve things, you could make it a 6-team bracket. But I think with an 8-team, when you're power conference, so to speak, you get a spot. Not a guaranteed seed, not a certain seed you get. You get a spot, and then 2 at large. And that way you could pull, there would be no arguments against Bama being in there with the 2 at large spots, because they were obviously one of the best non-conference winners. But then you've got, teams that are missing because even though they won their conference, this other team, Alabama's better, even though they didn't even compete for their conference championship.
It goes back to a couple years ago. Being a Virginia Tech guy, I pay attention to their schedule. They went, I want to say undefeated, them and Boise State. Neither one got a shot in the national championship game, yet a few years later, Florida State, Clemson, hard schedules. You play the same teams. There's not that much difficult. The other thing is the way they do the bowl games. There's bowl games. Simple solution. Go with your 8-team format. When you get to the final 2 teams, the way they should do it is kind of like the Olympics do the tournament kind of style. Whoever the last 2 teams are left, they play in a national championship game. They don't play in the NCAA Rose Bowl championship game and get 2 bowl championships. No, you get national championship. The 2 teams they beat play in Rose Bowl. Then you start seeding out with who the other teams beat that made the playoffs. Give each one of them Rose Bowl, Cotton Bowl, Orange Bowl, Sugar Bowl, Fiesta Bowl, the main the old BCS bowl games. Then you don't have to wonder who's going to play in those other bowl games, because you got 8 to 10 teams. That's why I say maybe a 12 team, because then
you could seed all the games.
Then that's 5 bowl games and the championship game. 12 teams. Everybody else. By then, you can say, well, Clemson didn't make the playoffs. We'll put them in a bowl game in the Chick-fil-A Bowl in Georgia against SMU. We'll put TCU against Florida since they didn't make it. And everybody still gets those games. If they're worried about playing more games, cut some games off the schedule where Alabama plays Middle Tennessee State. Make them play within their conferences and within their division. Don't send Alabama to Livingstone College or Catawba College and play them. That's just beating up on the little guy. If you're going to, they keep talking and making a big deal about bullying all the time. Well, to me, Alabama playing a Division II or Division III team, it's bullying. Even Virginia Tech's guilty of it. I don't think they should go play Richmond College or Carson Newman, because it's just, to me, it's unfair. Play your conference, because you don't see the New England Patriots going and playing one of the arena football teams or playing against a college team. You don't see it happening. Play within your conference and division first.
Yeah, and then when they go down and they play FCS teams, that's another thing. You got an opinion on this, Brooklyn?
Yeah, but you probably will not agree with it.
Go ahead.
Okay.
You're entitled to your opinion,
So
even if it's stupid.
it is very stupid, and I think it should be done for not just football, but for all sports. Whoever you have, it goes into. It doesn't have to necessarily be the playoffs, but especially the championship game, whatever it is, the World Series, Super Bowl, the conference. Not conference championship, whatever the championship game they do for football. If you win, you should not be allowed to, you can still play and everything, but you're not allowed to go on to, the playoffs or anything. I know, it's stupid, but I just think that's kind of my insight on it.
I really don't understand what you're saying, but...
Okay. So, if you win a game,
Uh-huh.
you can't go on and play for, the championship game next year. That way it's kind of a different
Oh,
person.
you're talking from year to year?
Yeah.
That you're barred from
you
winning a
have to-
championship year to
You
year.
have to have, a year where you can't be into the playoffs.
Yeah,
but
you
then you
can
have
go
a
on the
wasted
next
year. I could see how someone would game that system, like in the NFL. You overspend in one year, and then if you win the championship the next year, you use that to get out from bad contracts and stuff. You're eating a bunch of dead cap.
They're conferences like the SEC, especially. They're the big bad in college football. They wouldn't agree to it. But if you think about it, think if Nick Saban had a horrible recruiting class one year, or for a couple years, and one of those years he knew we could play for the national championship, but we're not good enough to win it. It'd be okay for us to sit out. Some teams would probably look at it as resting your players for a year.
I just think that would hurt recruiting overall. If you win the title game, that's one of the big recruiting things in college. So you win the title, any college sport. You win the title, and now you're going to go out and recruit. Well, you have all these incoming freshmen and transfers that'll go, nah, you can't compete for the title this year. Nah, I'm not even going to...
I get that, but there's definitely got to be a solution because it gets tiring to see the same teams play every year.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that the college football playoff was trying to bring in was some varying. I think it's something that college basketball is better at. 64, 68 teams vying for the championship. Granted, probably at least 8/10 of them really have no shot at the title. They're still there, and you still have to play your games. So I think college basketball is good. College football, they're getting there. Some other sports, baseball with expanding and how having the 2 wild cards, that helps out a lot. And football, since salary cap and free agency, what dynasties do you have? You got the Patriots, of course, but
you could argue that every so often you have a dynasty, but I think when the Patriots dynasty does end, the Brady Belichick era ends in New England, it's going to be a while before we see a dynasty because, to me, there's no one coach out there who is going to exemplify what Bill Belichick does because you've got a guy here who learned under what a lot of people argue is one of the biggest names in the NFL, Bill Parcells, and I don't see it changing anytime soon.
I think the only back-to-back winners since free agency was put into place, you've got, did Dallas get that cut off? 93 was when free agency came in, I think.
I believe they did get back-to-back in there somewhere.
Back in there. You got Denver in the late 90s, and you have the Patriots. And that's the only back-to-back winners, and of course no one's done 3 straight. So
we'll take us a break and we'll come back.
I want to thank Brooklyn for coming when hosting with us today, even if she didn't have a whole lot to say. Maybe we'll loosen you up a little bit better next time.
I'll be back, especially when it comes to football time.
Fantasy football,
when we do our special episode that week, will be the night of the fantasy football draft with hopefully all of the teams here. If not,
oh God, nobody's going to be able to get in a word.
We're gonna have to move to the big table back there, and everyone will be talking over each other, and it's going to be glorious. We might have like a 2-hour episode out of that.
God.
If they're not here, one of us can go with the next pick in the J&J Fantasy Football League, which is kind of interesting because I don't think we're going to have all the owners here. We may have to pick by proxy for most of them because I know of at least 4 we could get here, maybe 5.
Let's see, we got 3 here currently.
Hi.
There's at least
2 more that live in the same town.
Yep.
2 more. And then another one we could probably get here. It's the last 2. I think we could easily get 7. The 8th one might be interesting, but I think we could easily get 7.
If we're talking about Adam, I could force him in.
No, Jody.
Jody?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think he would be kind of difficult.
I'm not sure what he's up to now.
So yeah, we're going to take us a break. We'll be back in a few minutes with the NFL side of things this week.
Yep.
And
That's what he does.
now we're back. Before we get started too deep, we've talked several times, and I've talked about it a lot, about John Lynch knocking out his brother-in-law.
Yeah, I believe this was mentioned in the last episode, and I think 2 or 3 episodes ago.
So I did some research, and all I did was went online and typed in what game did John Lynch knock out his brother-in-law? Well, the answer is John Allred was a rookie tight end for the Chicago Bears. This is back in the days of the NFC Central and AFC Central, when there was no North or South. So Tampa Bay and Chicago played each other twice a year. Just so happened the week of Thanksgiving, November 23rd, 1997, of all places, Soldier Field. John Lynch is running, and it's his job to watch the tight end. Allred is going for a pass. Can't remember the quarterback's name. John Lynch just throws in a hit, which by today's standard would probably be a 4-game suspension, a fine, not to mention Allred would miss a couple games because of the hit. After Lynch made the hit, he's walking back pumped up because of how big of a hit he hit. Didn't know who he hit, and is walking back to the huddle. And in the article I read in the Tampa Bay Tribune, I think it's their paper, he says Derek Brooks, star linebacker for the Bucks, and I think team captain at the time, usually would have his mouthpiece in his mouth and calling out the next play. Well, this particular play, he's holding it in his hand, and Lynch is looking at him odd, and he goes, "You ain't going to go check on him? Did you see who it was?" He turns around and realizes his brother-in-law, goes over there, checks see if he's okay, realizes he is still knocked out. Allred said he still does not remember anything from that game, before the hit or after. Nothing from that day. Just thought I'd give you that little thing. So that's our little NSNZ trivia bit. If we ever ask somebody on here, what was the name of John Lynch's brother-in-law that he knocked out? What team, position, and what date? Nobody will be able to get it.
No. But it made Thanksgiving very awkward.
I'm not sure, but I believe that may have actually been a Thanksgiving game.
All right. Well, we have some NFL news to cover.
One more little tidbit from that I forgot.
Mm-hmm.
John Lynch's wife and his brother-in-law's family, it was his wife's brother. His wife, his in-laws were up in one of the boxes when the hit happened. So can you imagine after the game going, "Why'd you hit him that hard?" It's a game.
All right. Well, we've got some NFL news to cover. We've got.
It's lagging on us. We're good. We're back. Little hiccup in the recording there, but we're fine.
All right. For the last time here, there is some NFL news to cover from the past week, 2 weeks ish, with the opening of NFL free agency. We've got a lot of big names that hit out. The biggest.
Who is? Not to interrupt you, but for me, I think my biggest surprise in the entire free agency, and again, I hate to always harp on and try to talk up Virginia Tech players, but I think the two biggest surprises for me in my biggest 4 surprises in free agency had to have been, again, one's not free agency, but for the Bills to trade Tyrod Taylor, for the Honey Badger Tyrann Mathieu not to re-sign with Arizona and go to Houston. We had Jordy Nelson go to the Raiders and Danny Amendola leave the Patriots and go to the Dolphins. To me, those are my big 4 this year. Of course, not the biggest one. You can go ahead and say who he is because we both agreed he is the biggest name.
All right. You ready to argue on this? I think we're going to have differing opinions. So I'll let you start first about what your opinion is of the Minnesota Vikings signing Kirk Cousins to a 3-year, $80-some million fully guaranteed contract.
I'm not having a problem with that because now they have something they didn't have last year. Yeah, they had Keenum, Bradford, and Bridgewater, but I think they have a little bit more security and stability with Cousins because he's not the journeyman that Keenum was. He's not injury prone like the other two. I think he didn't have a strong core around him in Washington as far as coaches on offense. And I think he may be the answer that Minnesota's been looking for a long time.
Okay. I'll play a little devil's advocate here because it's not great if we both agree to the same thing. I agree with you for the most part. But as far as devil's advocate here, a fully guaranteed contract is dangerous for the owners, for the teams, not for the players. It's great for the players. The players, play a tough sport, have lots of injuries. Fully guaranteed contracts are a big deal. As far as the teams, what happens if you sign someone to a fully guaranteed contract for the amount of money that Kirk Cousins is going to make? And let's say he does get hurt. Say he gets hurt, or he doesn't play up to your expectation, or he goes to jail. The Mike Vick situation. They didn't let the Falcons out of their cap obligations with him. So, what are your thoughts on the contract?
I'm like you. I still have a problem. Again, we're talking about Minnesota, but I have a problem with the guaranteed money ever since Sam Bradford's ridiculous rookie contract at $50 million guaranteed for a guy maybe Eli Manning's caliber. Yeah, I'd give him guaranteed. Cam Newton, I'd give him guaranteed. Matt Ryan, I'd give him guaranteed. Andrew Luck, no chance. Because you got to prove something. Russell Wilson, I would give him guaranteed. Garoppolo, in his next contract negotiation, if he plays good during this contract, I'm going to guarantee him more than what I did before. Cousins, that's kind of one of those, we do, we don't, I don't. 3-year and a guarantee? No, I'd at least maybe guarantee a fourth of that or a third, not a full big chunk like that, because that's a lot to put into a guy that, one, has he been with Washington and took him to the playoffs at all?
Yes, one season, I believe.
But you're taking a big chance there with this guy versus who you had. You had Keenum, who a lot of people write off as not what you would anticipate him being. But yeah, there's no chance that I'm guaranteeing a contract to a guy. Not unless his numbers are insane, and I know him and my organization's going to be the solution. He's going to be the guy. He's going to be my Tom Brady, my Eli Manning, my Russell Wilson. Not my temporary solution to like Deshaun Watson or Tyrod Taylor in Cleveland.
Well, the other team that was... There were two other teams. There was one that was a little bit more serious. There's some reports floating around that the Jets actually offered Cousins more money, also fully guaranteed, but that Cousins wanted to go to some place that would compete immediately. The Cardinals apparently were also involved in bidding, but that they weren't willing to give as much money. That's the rumors that I have seen. I can't verify their accuracy. But I think, look at Minnesota last year. What was the weakest link on that team? And what eventually led to their downfall in the NFC Championship game. And that was the quarterback play. You know, they kind of got... Philly kind of manhandled them in general in that championship game. But I think with some better quarterback play, that particular game would have been closer. I think Cousins could be that missing piece.
How much do you think the Josh McDaniels fiasco in Indianapolis affected free agency as far as all these quarterbacks that moved? Do you think maybe Indianapolis may have made a move for a veteran like Bradford or even made a play for Cousins with the uncertainty of luck?
Honestly, I don't think so, because even if McDaniels came to Indianapolis, he's got Brissett there that he had coached before. And then, obviously, Luck, they're still being shy on information about Luck, but I think Luck plays this upcoming season. So I don't think they would go after anyone in particular. Maybe look into bringing some veteran help, just in case. But I think Brissett handled it well. Yes, Indianapolis did not win a bunch of games. Brissett's not a world beater. But he came into a position and he played well for the hand he was dealt.
That was one of those coaching situations there where the coaching staff was not equipped for him.
Mm-hmm. Apparently, they allowed the most second half points in the entire league last season. Just a lack of adjustments by the coaching staff.
Okay, who's next on your list?
Well, we've got part of the quarterback free-for-all. Obviously, Cousins was the big name. Then you've got some teams that either missed out on Cousins or decided that they weren't going to play this big money game. One of the first ones is former Viking. We mentioned him just a minute ago. Case Keenum going to the Broncos. Do you think that improves the quarterback play of the Broncos?
With the way he played last year, I think if maybe John Elway gets in his ear a little bit, not try to overstep the coaches, and just kind of go, Case, this is your team. We're not bringing you in to send you to another team at the end of the season or midway through. We're not going to do you like the Brock Osweiler, Peyton Manning situation. I think out of all these teams that landed free agent quarterbacks, Case Keenum had to be like the number 2 of everybody. Biggest loser as far as quarterbacks in free agency, I'm going to have to go between Arizona and Buffalo, because you've got, well, take that into extent too, Kansas City to an extent, because you went from a proven guy in Alex Smith, who oddly enough had a career that was mimicking Montana minus the Super Bowls to go from San Francisco to Kansas City. But I think, yeah, Keenum was the best of the Minnesota Vikings quarterbacks to get a good landing spot.
Yeah, I think besides Cousins, obviously landing in a team that already went to the NFC Championship game the year before, I think Case Keenum falls into the best spot. They've got, they've got a defense there. He's got some veteran wide receivers.
Was it Demaryius Thomas re-signed with San Francisco? Denver.
Mm-hmm. So they've still got the same veteran wide receivers there. They've got a defense. Running game's still iffy, but I think if they can put the pieces together, they can make a run. Especially with, it looks like San Diego isn't doing a whole lot free agency wise. So I don't know how much they could improve. You've got Kansas City going to be taking a step back. I know they're on the Patrick Mahomes bandwagon now, but he is not Alex Smith, not yet. And then you've got the Raiders. Between the Raiders and the Broncos, that is my head-to-head division winner matchup there. Whichever team can improve the most from their acquisitions.
Definitely with the components the Raiders had. But it just popped in my head, one person we didn't discuss on the list of big acquisitions. The guy who helped take the New England Patriots to a Super Bowl win over Atlanta, helped the Eagles to a Super Bowl win over the Patriots, signed with the Detroit Lions, LeGarrette Blount.
Yep.
And I made a joke with a guy at work, and I said, Lions win the Super Bowl. They got the winning quarterback from the last 2 years. And it's been rare, and that I know of, I don't think it's ever happened, that a player's been on 3 consecutive Super Bowl teams, and each team be a different team.
Yeah, I can't think of any situation that's happened before. Yeah, I didn't have him on my list. Not a whole lot of play in the running back. Running backs just haven't been hot right now.
Frank Gore's been out there too. His name's been out there a lot.
You got Gore, you got Stewart, you've got obviously Blunt. You had Rex Burkhead. Not really think of anybody else right off the top of my head. It's a deep draft for running backs, so that may be what everyone's waiting on. See what happens in the draft and then start going after some of these veteran running backs. But it's a young man's game in the backfield.
A curious thing, this just popped in my head, off script, but do you think the NFL would benefit, and free agents in general would benefit, if the draft were moved ahead of free agency? That's something interesting nobody ever talks about, and it was just one of those random thoughts that popped in my head.
I think we might actually do a full rundown on that, because there's going to have to be some research behind that.
And I do want to say that this was an idea that popped in my head. Since we're going to be off for like 2 weeks, I was thinking maybe next week, which will be in a couple days, Saturday, maybe do a double episode. It'd be 2 hours, but we'll break it down into cut it halfway through and have an hour break and do a show where we can devote it to normal topics, and then we'll have the special edition and just discuss that whole draft free agency concept.
That would be interesting. We have to see if we can work that schedule-wise. Anyway, back to what we were talking about. What was that, 20 minutes ago? No.
Meanwhile.
Quarterback free-for-all. Okay. The next team I got on the list is the Jets. They've actually landed 2 quarterbacks that were floating around. You got McCown and Bridgewater both going to the Jets. And I just mentioned that they were in the Kirk Cousins sweepstakes and fell out. So between spending all that money in Kirk Cousins and spending even less than that on 2 quarterbacks, 1 veteran presence and 1 potentially good quarterback, what do you think?
I think it gives Bridgewater something he had in Minnesota too. If he is the starter over McCown, it gives him a veteran backup that can kind of coach him and get him into the game and help him learn what he needs to learn. Because he just, to me, is not one of those elite quarterbacks, and it's not often that a guy at this stage in his career is going to become that elite guy. I may be wrong on that when it comes to guys like Cousins or Keenum, even Bortles in Jacksonville. Usually, by the time you get out of that rookie contract, if you haven't become one of the elite quarterbacks or one of the conversation pieces, you tend to relegate yourself to being one of the journeymen or the backups like Keenum did.
And I think this next season with the Jets is huge. I believe Bridgewater's deal is 1 year. So if he doesn't get a chance to see the field much, his next contract's going to be, minimum contract. And he's got to prove it this year. McCown's a known quantity. You know what you're going to get out of him. He looks like some games that he could beat the world, and then the next game he'll throw 3 interceptions, and he'll ruin your chances of making the playoffs. But the real question mark in New York is Bridgewater. If he can bounce back from that injury. Hopefully, while he's been injured, he's been working on the mental aspect of the game, reads, reading defenses and stuff like that. I think that would up his game a lot, because he's never been a guy with a real big arm. So hopefully with his rehab and stuff, he's perhaps worked on his footwork, his poise, stuff like that. And we'll see.
The other thing you have to look at is what we talked about last week when we were talking about the greatest players for each team, positions, stuff like that. When you brought up Joe Namath, that's another thing Bridgewater's going to have to learn to handle. That Minneapolis media market is not as intense as that New York market. He's going to have a lot more eyes on him than what he's used to, and how does he handle that adversity versus guys like Darrelle Revis or Keyshawn Johnson did.
I'll make this prediction now. The Jets, whoever their day one starter is, New York media will be calling for the backup by game 4. They'll simply make a mistake or something. Quarterbacks make mistakes. It happens. But New York media will be wanting their head and want the next guy up.
Not to mention, his head is going to be on that platter next to Todd Bowles' head, because Bowles is going to be one of those guys, this is make or break. Make the playoffs or you're out this year. What about the big piece of free agency? One that didn't agree with the quarterback of the team that the guy was let go from. Green Bay letting Jordy Nelson get away to the Raiders. You made a joke about this earlier, about them not letting him out of the building.
Yeah, Jordy Nelson had more meetings scheduled. There were reports coming in that he needed to go meet, I forget what team it was, but he had at least 2 more teams lined up, and they were not letting him leave without a deal. I think they probably locked him in a room with Gruden and said, you're not leaving this room until one of y'all is dead or a deal is signed. And Jordy Nelson took one look at Gruden and was like, he's too crazy. I'm not fighting him. Where's the contract?
Give me the paper, I'll sign it. I'll sign it. Whatever it is, I'll sign it. And he walked out of there, and his agent's on the phone going, dude, you got it. You got the big money. He wouldn't let me leave. I got stuck. I was there.
Yes, apparently they sent Derek Carr to pick him up at the airport. They courted him the whole way.
Could you imagine if they'd have sent 2 or 3 of their big defensive linemen or offensive linemen with them, and 2 of them get in the back seat next to him, and he's stuck in the middle, and he's like, okay, am I going to meet the Raiders, or am I going out into the middle of the ocean?
Well, the next team on the quarterback free-for-all is the team that's always needing a quarterback. Is always a quarterback free-for-all every year. The only problem is most of the time the quarterbacks are terrible. Cleveland. They traded, this isn't really a free agency move, but it's still a quarterback move. They traded for Tyrod Taylor of Buffalo. I'm a Tyrod Taylor fan. I think that he can do a lot. but do you think that this is a move that makes Cleveland, I don't want to say a contender because they still have a lot of work to do, particularly with the coaching staff, but is this something that makes them win 5 or more games?
5 or more? I'm not sure. I think they win more games than they have in the entire Hugh Jackson era.
Well, I mean, that's not too hard.
Will it be enough for him to stay there? I don't know. It'll be like what I talked about in one of the earlier episodes, where Hugh Jackson will be the coach of the Cleveland Browns if and only if Marvin Lewis is retained or retires. But no, I don't see him winning more than 5. But it would not surprise me at all if the Cleveland Browns made the playoffs. It's a bold prediction, but I do think they have a shot because they're stacked on offense. Now all they got to do is go out there in the draft and pick up some good, solid defensive players. Even go make a few more plays for some veterans to bring in. Because the biggest issue they have now is their big offensive tackle retired. And, I mean, I'm impressed with Cleveland. I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I think Cleveland made some of the biggest moves of any team. Aside from Washington getting Alex Smith, these were some bold moves they made.
Yeah, they made some bold trades. Obviously, I don't think trading for Tyrod Taylor keeps them from drafting a quarterback at 1. I think they draft a quarterback at 1. I'm pretty sure that's solid now since the Jets traded up with Indianapolis. They swapped. I think quarterbacks could potentially go 1, 2, and 3. The one team out of those top 3 that I could see passing on a quarterback would be the Giants. Now, if you're Cleveland and you pick somebody else with number 1, not a quarterback, and you try to wait till 4, you could potentially get in your 3rd choice for quarterback, which is a deep draft for quarterbacks, but I don't think it's that deep.
Okay, I want to spin a full circle of making another Bill Belichick connection. Bill Belichick let one of his key receivers get away, and I know he's on your list, but we'll get to him in a minute. It's the guy that the Dolphins franchise tagged, but traded to Cleveland in Jarvis Landry. Now they have Jarvis Landry. If he doesn't get in trouble, they have Josh Gordon. They have Tyrod Taylor. They have a key running back. I forgot his name. But they have some great weapons in offense for the first time. And I don't know how long they have relevant players. It's just how quickly can these guys get the playbook in their head? Can we see a team unity where it seems like in years past, the Cleveland Browns, the current version of the Cleveland Browns, before the team left and went to Baltimore, the guys they have now, it seems like most of them have only been about the paycheck.
Now, before we move on to another team, I want to drop a piece of trivia about the Browns. With Thomas's retirement, Josh Gordon is now the longest tenured Cleveland Brown.
Didn't really know.
You didn't know that? I wouldn't have guessed it either. I figured there would be like a kicker or a punter or something that would be that. Nope, Josh Gordon.
Tom Brady's cleats have probably been in the league longer than most of the players.
Yeah. All right, the next quarterback free-for-all team. We've got the team that just traded. We got Buffalo. Buffalo trades away Tyrod Taylor. Who they got on their roster? They got Nathan Peterman, who threw 5 picks in a game. So who do they go out in free agency and get? They don't really have the money to spend on these big-ticket guys, so they end up landing the former Cincinnati backup, A.J. McCarron, who until like a month ago was unsure whether or not he would be an unrestricted free agent. He is, though. So, A.J. McCarron, not seen him play a whole lot. He did manage to lead Cincinnati to some victories when Dalton was hurt. But do you think he could be the answer in Buffalo?
No. As much as I am a big anti-Alabama or SEC for that matter quarterback, if you look at the list of quarterbacks to come out of the SEC and be successful, you've got Peyton Manning from Tennessee, Eli Manning from Ole Miss. At the time when he was drafted, I believe Southern Mississippi was in the SEC with Brett Favre. You got Cam Newton. So, I mean, he's got a big slot to fill there because, I mean, even if you look at Tim Tebow at Florida, didn't pan out. And I think it's just that, yeah, he had a great college career, but it didn't really translate to the NFL. It doesn't seem like he was given that full readiness on what to expect in the NFL. Can he win? I think he may be a short-term solution. And above all, the one thing everybody has to remember when it comes to being a quarterback in Buffalo is you have to emerge from one of the biggest shadows that team's got in Jim Kelly.
Yeah, they've had almost no stability at that position since Kelly left. Buffalo is an interesting team because they're not a team that you think about with great quarterback play, besides Kelly. So they've got to make some improvements. But I think this is more of a lateral move for them than a trade up or trade down. I think McCarron can be better than what some people say he can. I think he could be that Tyrod Taylor level player. You know, just above your starting line. You know, if you've got someone, say there's a hypothetical line. People used to call it the Dalton line, although I think Dalton's higher within that line. If you've got a guy that's better than that line, you're all right. If you got a guy below that line, you need to be looking for a quarterback like right now. So I think Tyrod Taylor and McCarron are like low-level starters. Anybody below that is either backup or some kind of project quarterback you're trying to develop. All right, we're going to go to the desert for this next team. We got Arizona, the team of washed-up quarterbacks. Does Sam Bradford have a fountain of youth type experience in Arizona like the last couple quarterbacks they had?
He will not have a Kurt Warner resurgence. I don't even think he gets to Carson Palmer level because he is just so far on that back nine of his career. Golf analogy there. He's on his back nine. And for that matter, he's probably on the back 3 of his career. I don't see him doing a lot, especially with that one key problem that happened. They lost the anchor of their defense, one of their anchor players in the Honey Badger, which is one of those guys that was probably one of my favorite Cardinal players. But Bradford's just had so much unpredictability in his career with his knee. So much so that most analysts refer to him by the name of a character from an M. Night Shyamalan movie. He is referred to as Mr. Glass, just because he is so fragile. Yeah. Now, he's not as bad as another guy who suited up for the Eagles and the Vikings in Mr. Butt Fumble, Mark Sanchez. Not that bad. But I think Bradford should go ahead and accept that he's not worth the money everybody wants to pay him. He should relegate himself to being that mentor backup versus being the starter.
What do you put the over-under of games that he starts for Arizona this year? What do you put the over-under at?
Probably the same amount of chance that he stays healthy for the whole year, 50%.
So you say 8 games is the over-under?
At best, 8 games.
At best, 8 games. Let's say the over-under is 7.5. You going to take the under on that?
Not sure if any bet on Sam Bradford's good. Because you could sit there and say, he's going to play 7, 8 games. He may play 16. But that I know of, I do not think Sam Bradford in his career has played a full season. Whether it be through knee injury, concussion, pulled muscle, something. I don't think he's played a full season.
That's something we'll have to research. All right. Enough about Arizona. We'll go to the team that is famous for their ineptitude. All right, the Redskins. Again, not a free agent move, although they did lose a big piece in free agency with Cousins leaving. But they traded, prior to the new league year starting, they traded for Alex Smith. Again, this is another one of those I think could be more of a lateral move. I like Cousins. I think he can be a good quarterback. But Alex Smith is a proven commodity. Alex Smith, as much as people despise hearing it, he is a game manager type player. He doesn't go out there and lose you games. He goes out there, if you put the pieces around him, he will win you games. So, what do you think of Alex Smith, Washington Redskins?
There's a guy, he's one of the cooks in the cafeteria at work. And when that happened, I asked him, I said, what'd you think? He said, I think it's stupid that Washington is willing to pay Alex Smith all that money, but they won't give Cousins that kind of money, and they are going to let him walk. I do think it's an upgrade versus the last few quarterbacks they've had. I mean, Cousins was good, but you're comparing him to the guy before him in RG3 that
flash in the pan.
Was almost a Sam Bradford, but his knee just never was the same after hurting it. Again, you know my opinion on teams and Heisman Trophy quarterbacks. I'm not a fan. Just for the simple fact that only 2 Heisman Trophy quarterbacks have had successful NFL careers as far as winning Super Bowls and staying consistent with the playoffs in Jim Plunkett and Joe Montana. Cam Newton is, if he can get the right personnel around him, he could join that list, but it's a short list. Is Alex Smith their answer? He may be the saving grace for Jay Gruden's job.
All right. That's fair. All right. We're getting close on time, so we got to run a little bit quicker through some of the other free agency signings. At wide receiver, we have Danny Amendola to Miami. We got Michael Crabtree to the Ravens. The trade that sent Jarvis Landry to Cleveland. And Jordy Nelson to the Raiders. We already talked about Nelson and Landry a little bit. How about Crabtree? Crabtree to the Ravens. Is that a good piece for them?
It definitely gives Flacco something he hasn't had in a while in another credible target. But out of those 4 names, I'm going to say Baltimore's the biggest loser in the 4 as far as the player. Landry would be the number 2, the Browns would be number 2, but that's only because the Dolphins picked up Amendola. Huge pickup there. Whoever their quarterback is for next year is going to have to make sure Amendola is your target. Look at how big of a key piece of the puzzle he was with no Julian Edelman on the Patriots team. And you could see how much work he was actually giving in for the team.
Yeah. I think Flacco in Baltimore hasn't really had a number 1 target. Not one that really stood out.
Since their Super Bowl run.
You could make some arguments for a few guys. You could even say Steve Smith for those 2 years that he was good there. But yeah, I think they needed somebody to come in to be that number 1 guy. Crabtree, not in his prime anymore, but I think could be a good veteran leadership for him. And then, of course, with Amendola to the Dolphins, with losing Landry, they needed somebody to come in and be that number 1. All right. Over on the other side of the ball, some big defensive names. You got Richard Sherman, who signed with the 49ers. Big move.
was scheduled to meet with another team, kind of like
Kind of like
Nelson was, but signed with the 49ers. For me, not a good pick. I think he should have went out and looked at a couple more teams first, because he went to what I consider not a playoff team. It to me felt like a little bit more money, but for him it was a win-win situation because there's no agent involved. It was self-negotiation, which for Sherman is not bad, because here's a guy that is smarter than most people think he is, to be willing to walk away from the Legion of Boom, which is now the Legion of Doom, and not in good terms like the pro wrestlers, but they're doomed now. Pete Carroll's days, I feel, are now numbered because he's done got rid of so many key pieces. The one Seattle Seahawk I would love to see switch teams, especially to make the trip down to Atlanta, would be Cam Chancellor. Another one of those guys like Tyrod Taylor is an ex-Hokie from Virginia Tech.
Yeah, I think as far as Richard Sherman's legacy in Seattle, I think it'll be looked upon like Favre with his Minnesota days. If it'll be glazed over in a few years. A few years after Sherman retires, he'll go back to Seattle. He'll get inducted into the Ring of Honor or whatever it is they call there. He'll have his number hung up in around the stadium. But I think that this is a good move for Sherman. I think the 49ers I'm going to disagree with you and say the 49ers make a bigger leap. Maybe not playoffs, but I think they got a big piece in Garoppolo, putting together some other pieces. I think they make a run. One of the last big names I want to talk about is Ndamukong Suh, who is currently teamless, but has about 4 or 5 teams sweet-talking him.
Including his former team, the Lions.
The Lions are on that list. You've got New Orleans, Tennessee, and I heard Seattle come up on that. Do you think his potentially, let's say his dirty past, do you think that hurts his market? Or do you think that he's just that much of a dominant pass rusher that someone will spend a lot of money on him?
I think it all boils down to need. To me, I would go back to Detroit, where I began my career, because you got Matt Patricia, one of the best defensive minds in football. Go there. Join them. Because I think Patricia may be a surprise to everybody.
All right. Well, I think we're about out of time today. Like you were mentioning earlier, it'd be great to do that special episode, record that on Saturday, but we'll see how that works out. You want to read us out here, or
I'll let you do it this
you
way.
let me do it? All right.
Just a few more minutes.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Not So Neutral Zone. Check us out on our Facebook page. For David, I'm Jacob. Hope to see you next week.